welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Inopportune Opportunity, how to be a better version of yourself in the future. Our speaker today is someone that no one knows and no one has ever seen or heard of before in life. So I'll introduce him. Mitch Bach is the co-founder of Trip School. He's been training tour directors and guides for over a decade. At Trip School, which has quickly become a leading provider of education in the industry, he and his partner, Alan, offer amazing resources and training for guides. Since our first conference 4 years ago, Mitch has partnered with IATDG to offer unbelievable content and resources to our members. He's a former advisory team member and a trusted friend of the association. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Mitch Bach.
Thank you, Sir Vaughn. And nice to see so many great faces. A couple of revelations there, a couple of things to mention. First of all, Alan is my business partner and not my husband. I'm pretty sure about 2/3 of IATDG thinks I'm married to him. However, it's essentially a common law marriage at this point. We spend more time together with him on Zoom than with my husband, who is hiding in the bedroom right now. And thank you also for notifying me that I'm a former member of the advisory committee. I think I was just fired live on camera. I'm joking. The topic of today is, I don't know, something that is essential. It could also be called what's been floating in my brain during this demented, strange time we're all living through. But let me start by just saying a huge thank you to, that'll make sense in a minute. A huge thank you to Vaughn, to Karen, to Ricky, to everybody who has put this on. First of all, it's free, which is insane. But second of all, nobody has to do nothing right now. We're all living through this national, international nightmare, and everything that is being done in our community is being done out of goodness. And I have to say, I think that's what is one of the most phenomenal things about this community, is the amount we're all willing to give of ourselves, our time, to each other, just to make it through there. The Danish have a word for that, which I will reveal to you later in my slides. But that's kind of what this talk is about. I'm gonna share my screen now. This is, notice it is not called Inopportune Opportunity. It's because Vaughn has this compulsion to change the title of every talk that I give. But it's the same thing. And I play along, I go, yeah. And then I just change my talk back to the original title when it comes time to present. But it's the same thing. We're living in an incredibly opportune time, but it is a time for us to really think about how we are going to be better when we get back. First of all, how is everyone doing? Don't answer that. Are you sick of that question? Like, do you hate that question in your life? I've developed a stock answer. How are you doing? And I go, living the dream, as in, is this all a dream? And when can I wake up and move on with my life again? I will say this, I majored in philosophy in college. And so this downtime, I've become a little philosophical. I feel like an aged old man looking back on this industry and also looking forward, both in my role as a trainer, as a tour guide, as a tour director, as all of the words that start with tour, but also as an industry, kind of what we're doing. We're in an incredibly young industry. In the history of civilization, IATDG is roughly there, AKA right now. And tour directing is not far behind that. I mean, honestly, when it comes down to it, we're not doctors or lawyers or prostitutes. We're not these age-old professions. We're something that has come out of the development of a young tourism industry. I read this book. There's going to be a lot of books. I've been doing a lot of book reading during this time. And I read this book, which is called Grand Tours and Cook's Tours. It's basically the 18th and 19th century history of travel, of the industry. And I have to say, it sounded lovely. It sounded lovely back when nobody could afford to travel except rich English gentlemen. It was part of their education. And it took so long to get to Paris that you would stay there for 3 months. That sounds great right now. But I did discover gems like basically the first package tour operator was the Vetturino. in Italy, who were essentially men in capes in bad little wagons that would transport tourists from town to town, talking along the way and booking hotels and restaurants. Even before Thomas Cook, you had these people, and some of them became so well known as personalities, as just like nonstop talkers along the way in their kind of weird little motor coach, that they'd get requested and they would book specifically that guide or that veterinarian or that driver, which is kind of amazing. I also like this gem, which was Paris in 1785. The rage for traveling has reached an amazing pitch of folly. 3,700 English tourists in Paris in only 6 weeks. 40,000 on the continent. That's incredible. No, it's not. It was the pre-beginning of the 20th century. Read another book called Overbooked, which I really recommend, even though she could have cut 20,000 words out of it. She was clearly paid by the word because it's a very long book for no reason. But Elizabeth Becker did a phenomenal job, and I believe it's one of the only books that have really gone through the history of what tourism has looked like in the 20th century. And there are some weird things that get discovered. For example, European tourism, as we know it today, as the single most visited continent on Earth, comes from a few things, like the French inventing the 2-week paid vacation. And all of a sudden, the French had to go somewhere during those 2 weeks. And very quickly after that, Americans were like, good idea. Why don't we give people 2 days? And that was good for us. And the Marshall Plan, which discovered the power of injecting money really quickly into an economy by developing the tourism industry. And this has been replicated in Vietnam and Cambodia and a lot of war-torn countries. But in this case, it was just sending Americans over to France and then giving them a trip. And look at this. I mean, this is crazy. Just in 1950, that's not that, I mean, it's a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. You have 25 million international trips going on. 25 years later, you've got 222 million. And then all of a sudden, by 2012, you've got 1 billion international visitors to different countries around the world. You can see mainly Europe and Asia and the Americas. I mean, 1989 to 1991, you've got the Berlin Wall going down. You've got the Soviet Union disappearing as we knew it. No new markets opening up. This is all in the last 30 or so years, which kind of astounds me because you don't learn a lot of lessons. I mean, I'm over 30, and I have to say that there's a lot of lessons I could still learn in life. And so as an industry, it shocks me some level of immaturity we have in a lot of fashions. And also excitement that we have in the folly of our industry's youth. For example, the fact that growth, I mean, look at that growth. I mean, up until the 2020 travel apocalypse, you know, we were on course for a couple of billion travelers. That's an increase of 1 billion people in about 15 years. And so, you know, the year 2012 is when we learned the word over tourism. Venice has 60,000 people, 25 million visitors. No grandi navi. Get those big ships out of there. Dubrovnik at the same time, realizing that maybe more than one cruise ship a day depositing thousands of people into a town of 40,000 isn't great. And the mayor literally issuing edicts saying, locals, stay at home during the day. Let the Americans in their fanny packs wander around, buy souvenirs, and then come out at night like gremlins or whatever. So that context is obviously at this point now very hard to even think about or remember, because this 2020 year of ours has really transformed what we kind of what we think about. I would love even a fraction of those visitors back. But this, I call it a global pause button because, I don't know, I grew up watching Saved by the Bell, and once in a while Zach Morris would do a timeout. He would just kind of freeze reality, freeze high school, and he was messing with it. But it's just a chance to be like, time out. What the heck are we doing in our lives? And for me, it's been a lot of questioning myself and questioning this industry in terms of how can we all improve as individuals and as an industry. I grew up Catholic. I grew up very Catholic, and I even became a Jesuit novice at a certain point. So I have this like monastic tendency that I beat down with a hammer inside of me. But one of the things you would do before you'd go to confession and reveal all of your sins to this man is you'd examine your conscience. You'd look at yourself and look at your industry and say, what have I done wrong, or what could I do better? And that's really kind of what I want to look at today. It felt weird to me to like be too focused on thinking about itineraries or tips or tricks or whatever for a tour that may not happen for a long time. But this privileged time for me is a time to think about really what we're doing at our best. And for me, that's getting beyond the giving a good time, the infotainment. I was probably guilty of this more than anybody here because I didn't know anything when I started. I wasn't trained. I didn't even have time to learn anything. I was thrown into a 5-country, 15-day tour, and I was an idiot. And so all I knew was how to entertain and tell a good story that was about 3% true and try to give the guests a good time. But I was a bad educator. I was bad at doing anything deeper. But I'll say this much. The thing that I come back to more and more as I reflect on what the power is in travel, I call it a decentering of us, of human beings, of everybody. We aren't king of a castle when we're flying to Prague or we're going to Australia or we're going to Africa. We're throwing ourselves into a totally new context. And it's a context that really either makes you incredibly judgy and arrogant or it makes you modest. You understand, like Flaubert says there, what a tiny place you occupy in the world. And that decentering in the relationship that we have with our guests and with the space is a really powerful moment of vulnerability and being open to thoughts and experiences in a way that we aren't when we're at home in our own context, thinking the thoughts we always think. That's an incredible power because for me, it means that I have an ability to influence people in a way that I wouldn't if I was just walking down the street with them in their hometown in Alabama or in Florida or Washington State or Poughkeepsie. But that, and so I'm really interested in the way that we've thought a lot of times about this new democratic right to travel, this way that we can travel anywhere all the time for the price of a $7 Ryanair flight, and suddenly we're in Prague. We don't talk a lot about our responsibilities outside of our sort of, I guess, day-to-day job duties that we get from the company. What's our greater responsibility as actors in this industry? And so that's why I kind of want to talk a little bit about the silver lining of COVID-19. There's the black hole of COVID-19, but something that can come out of it that draws us to, I guess, a greater good. And for me, it means thinking about responsible tourism. I will say this, I was probably a little dismissive as a New Yorker, as predominantly a city guy, a city guide. I was a little dismissive of thinking that I needed to think about things like sustainability or responsibility to the environment. My eyes have been open. Partially, I moved to a street in Brooklyn, which looks like this. If you have touch retouch and you can remove all the people from your app, because actually normally it looks like this down here in the lower right. It's an incredibly busy street, and it's incredibly busy even though all the other streets around it are pretty empty for a few reasons. Instagram, people think suddenly this is the shot that I have to get. This idea of bucket list travel where suddenly 600 million people around the world all need to go to the same 12 places to accomplish their lives. These honeypot destinations, the way that social media or the way the internet or the way anything conspires to end up drawing human beings all to the same spots on earth, like Venice and Barcelona and Dubrovnik. And we're wealthier than we have been in the history in terms of matching that income with the ability to travel around the world. So I have to say, I use the bucket list phrase a lot. But I kind of hate it now because to me, it means that I understand the impulse and I don't disagree with the impulse. Like, I want to make the most of the rest of my life, but I do want to make the most of the idea that, travel is kind of checklist travel. I have to go here, I have to go there, I have to go there. Because it's usually because you heard of it or you saw it on Facebook. And to me, it saps some of the spontaneity, some of the enjoyment of discovery out of travel, because we're pigeonholing it into these things that I think the other person has done. I better do it. I better see that as well. We were watching Bali crumble. I was a I was a dumb little teenager when I went to Bali for the first time, and it kind of did look like this. It was a long time ago. I don't know if you've heard of the Great Garbage Emergency a few years ago of Bali, but the same beaches look incredibly different when you almost have double the amount of tourists as you do residents, all occupying the same beaches. And for some reason, Indonesia had a bunch of superheroes come with rakes to clean up the trash problem. That may seem like far away, but it's not in terms of when we look at the landscapes of the places we tour as European tour operators, as American tour directors, tour guides. I'd like to kind of just roll through in these remaining minutes, just a series of reflective questions that may or may not apply to you, but hopefully open up something inside of you in terms of the ability of us to think about what we're doing on these tours when we do return. For one, it is, I'll also say this is a little bit of an act of confession about how bad I have been over the years, but I'm a little bit of a know-it-all New Yorker who I'm like my dog, like I'd rather bite someone than run away in fear. And so I often am telling someone to shove off, let me do my own thing, without actually reflecting on whether or not where I'm positioned is a great position in terms of where I'm talking, and is it respectful to others? Is it respectful to locals? I know I've been down in South Carolina before and sort of just kind of issued the laws around separating your groups so that you're not a big clump on one narrow street. And I've even known that when I was a resident of the West Village. I would do things that I would yell at other guides for, but I would do them myself. And it's hard because you need to have kind of a sense of duty to yourself and to the greater good of respecting the local culture, the local streets. And I think right now is a great time if we do DC and New York, or if we do the music cities of the South or California, to ask ourselves, are there places where I can ask myself, should I be gathering there, or should I be jumping up on this garbage can and screaming to 50 people? Or is there a way that I might do this more delicately? I'll say this much. I started a while ago talking about the Vietnam Wall on the motor coach, doing it all on the motor coach instead of with my lifesaver at the Three Soldiers statue. And I say my commentary, and then I also say, when we get off this coach, you're going to notice everybody else screaming, running around. But I think unlocked something special about this memorial. I told you about Mylan. I told you about the youngest soldiers on the wall. I want us to sort of remember that spirit. And I think when we do get off the bus, and it was just Veterans Day, I don't know, a day ago or a week ago or a year ago, I can't tell anymore what is time. But I tell my students, I say, if something does come out of your mouth, I want it to be thank you. And it's thank you to the gift of the soldiers in these statues that we're going to be seeing, that represent the gift of life in order for us to live, or the gift of courage, the gift of even having these symbols of grandeur. And for me, that I'm finding a way to be respectful of the fact that everybody's running around, but also weaving it into the way that I'm choreographing my tours. And I think about it in terms of New York City. Times Square is atrocious, except that it's a must-see, and it really is a sight to behold. But again, I'll confess that I've often yelled about Times Square and said, listen, the only reason a New Yorker comes here is to go to theater, and we make excuses if we run into somebody we know here, saying, oh, it's just on my way somewhere else. But there's a chance at education here. I can say, listen, there's a lot of reasons, and they're pretty obvious, namely Spider-Man and Naked Cowboys and Broadway and everything else, as to why you would come here. But let me tell you why this is great, but why there are other parts of New York that I want to show you. And it's related to the fact that other parts of New York allow you to really understand how people live here, so you don't come away with a caricature. And it's also so that when we go to lunch, I'm not sending you to lunch here, so you go over to McDonald's and pay a giant corporation money that is extracted from the economy of New York. Instead, we're going to go over to Jackson Heights, or we're going to go to Harlem, or we're going to go to just anywhere, somewhere that I know is supporting the local economy, but also giving the local flair. They work hand in hand. There's an economic reason or responsibility that we can have for deciding that we want to go and seek out something beyond the Panera Breads and the McDonald's. No offense, I mean, I'll eat my Panera and like it, but if I have a choice and there's a little bit more work that I need to do to find something else, there's so many reasons why. I think that's my point here. And really what this is, when you add those kinds of explanations, so I'm not just dismissing Times Square and then taking them somewhere else, but saying there's real reasons why we as human beings should be thinking about where our money goes, who we support, and why. That's also training those students, those adults, to be better citizens and better stewards of local economies back at home. And people listen to us. It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary the way we understand that. And so one thing that I'm doing right now on all the different itineraries I work as an operator and as a guide is I'm looking at every stage and saying, am I missing an opportunity here? Let's say I'm in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'm doing a lunch stop there. Am I clear that the lobster roll that I'm recommending is actually a local place, or is it masquerading as a hut, but it's actually owned by a giant conglomerate in Boston? Responsible travel means we're thinking about those questions and we're not just thinking about which one tastes the best. Frankly, as a guide, you can convince anybody something tastes good, the power of words. Tour operators should be and are thinking of this. I'm gonna highlight the Travel Corporation, which is Destination America, Insight Vacation, Luxury Gold, Trafalgar, all of those. They have created across their 8 million billion brands that they have a 501c3 called the Treadright Foundation. That's their entire job is just to look at the way their tour products and their company brands are interacting with local communities and giving money back either to those communities or doing some project that is encouraging sustainability. And it's an enormous, enormous investment of their time and their energy, but they have a great amount of power when you own that many brands, from Kentucky up to Luxury Gold to, Irish brands that you've never heard of, unless you're from Ireland and your name is Brendan, who I think might be here. And I would encourage you to go to the Treadright Foundation and notice that they've got making travel. How can you make travel matter that they send out to their guests? First of all, they say, make sure you choose a company that has commitment to this, which is great marketing, but make it known, us as guides or as operators, to our operators, that we care about this. I will tell you, there's great power if suddenly an operations manager receives 30 emails saying, what are we doing to make sure that the restaurants we're booking, the hotels that we're using, at the expense of it maybe being a little bit difficult, are making a value choice to support something that is supporting the economy rather than just extracting good. If you've ever heard of that phrase leakage in terms of tourism or over tourism, it means the way in which you can come into a place, spend a ton of money, like an all-encompassing resort in Punta Cana or somewhere in Mexico, but then you find out that 90% of that money is actually going to a corporation in Denmark or in Asia or the United States or somewhere. Things like going paperless or just encouraging people to travel off season, travel to destinations that need tourism. As guides, as tour directors, just being very intentional with a checklist. I've made myself a little checklist. Do I need to print this out? Am I using a lot of plastic water bottles because I'm lazy and I just keep going to the bodega and buying a $3 plastic bottle and then throwing it away? Am I designing my itineraries to make sure I'm encouraging walking? And am I also using conservation in whatever way I can as part of my commentary? In other words, this is the reason why we care about these things in this city, because of the great garbage crisis. Because of the great garbage crisis. That's why we're collecting our trash and taking it with us and putting it back at our Hilton hotel, which can afford to take it out. But opening that dialogue with your operators and operators opening that dialogue with your guides, I think that is so important. And since I seem to have a lot of Catholic references these days, holding ourselves accountable and also holding our guests accountable. Destination America or Travel Corporation removed all plastic bottles from their tours everywhere. And I'll tell you, I worked for Luxury Gold and I would sit there and place that little luxury bottle of water on the seats every morning. Removing that was a re-education of the guests, saying, we're going to send you a lovely water bottle. And this is the reason why we're doing this, because we have a huge footprint on Earth. So understanding that there is a retraining of your tour guests that may be involved, but there's a greater good to be accomplished that gives us permission to be a little difficult on our guests. And I'm going to also say this much. This article kind of blew my mind. It's from a couple of years ago, but the next trend in travel is don't. Just a little button on this. There's definitely reasons why the grand tour model of staying in Paris for 3 months is a little bit better. And it's because this bucket list, try to nail everything American style. And I say American specifically because it grew out of this kind of mass consumerist movement of making sure I see everything, the Eiffel Tower in the morning, the Berlin Wall in the afternoon. By the end of the day, I'm on the Charles IV Bridge in Prague. And this idea that the more I can see, the better is there's a responsibility to that. And so I would say this, Matt Baker is basically making the point that I want to make, which is we have a power as different cogs in this giant wheel to do this together, and we're stronger when we do it together. So I'm not saying call up Paul Sterner at Globus and say, I can't believe you're giving out water bottles. Mitch said you shouldn't. This is a learning process that we're all going through right now, and it's much better to come with a solution. Have we all learned that already? Call your operations department with a solution, which is, like Matt Baker said, I see that we book Applebee's, and I understand that because we're on a 300-pack student tour. But I will say, this little neighborhood has 3 delis right next door to each other. They do a $12.95 breakfast buffet or lunch buffet or dinner buffet or whatever. Just kidding, it's New York. They don't, not that cheap. But imagine that, where you might say, this might be a little bit more work, but I'll tell you, it's still going to house that many students, and it's a real local interesting experience. And I know all of those diners are locally owned. Or just go down to one of the 800-seat dim sum palaces in Chinatown and make that into an experience. And it does mean we have to raise our bar, because I hear a lot the idea that I hear a lot that, oh, kids aren't going to eat all of that. But I'm going to say, a lot happens in our ability to tell a good story and to make it, to implicate the students in the responsibility to open their minds. I just start when I'm talking to 8th graders, not that we have to just talk about 8th graders, is I say, I'll tell you this much, probably when you're 14 years old, you haven't decided everything in life that you're going to like to eat. And I'll tell you this much, you're going to sound way more sophisticated when you're back at home if you say, yeah, I tried sushi in New York City. What did you do with your life? Or you're going to have a great story when you try eel. And then you can go back and you can complain about how bad it is for the next 2 years of your life and make a Snapchat story and a TikTok about it. Either way, you've got a story. Either way, you've got something to share. And this is great. Paul's mentioning that Globus has removed their non-reusable water bottles from all their tours. Keep up the momentum. Keep up this collaborative effort of improving the way in which we act in a sustainable way with our culture, with the cultures that we go to. This has to do, I've talked about this, not only with the environment, but with the way we respect culture. And it comes down to a lot of just recommendations. I just simply leave off the recommendations that I know some kids want. Like, I know there's a Taco Bell just 2 streets down, but I'm not recommending it. And I'm not even going to say that that thing's there. First of all, they'll discover it on their iPhones if they really need it. But I'm trying to hold them to a higher bar, and to my students. I get a lot of questions sometimes when I, say this kind of stuff, where somebody might go, yeah, but where do we have the time? Well, every tour is different. I'm not necessarily saying add a day focused on sustainability and local environments, local culture to your itinerary. I know we can't do this, but I worked for a major student tour operator for many, many, many years, and student tour operators are incredibly packed in like sardines. But I'll say this much, I was always given 4 hours on the bus to lead a sightseeing. I was a licensed New York sightseeing guide. And I will say, for my first years, it was like, I'd better start at Columbus Circle and make my way down Broadway and go to Times Square and go to Union Square and go to make my way down to the bottom of the island. And I realized I can go anywhere, and there isn't just a route. I had somebody once ask me at the beginning of one of the New York trainings that we did, hey, can I have your route, your New York City route that you do? I said, I don't have a route. I have a constellation of stops that feel right at the right time for the right group and the right weather and the right season. But I'll add to that, part of my sensitivity now is also making sure that I could just hop over the 3rd Avenue Bridge. I'm up in Harlem. I could hop on over there and actually I've done a little scouting on my own, not just of that new hidden gem in Hell's Kitchen, where there are none, but I'm going in a direction that I've never gone before. And before I turn out this kind of boogeyman of, we're going to the Bronx, don't get shot, I've been guilty of these stereotypes myself, but instead, can we raise the bar and actually share a version of these neighborhoods that go beyond the stereotypes, that connect to that local culture in a way that is bringing stimulus to the economy and opening the minds of our guests. And I've done that where they go, where are we, Mitch? I go, oh, we're in the Bronx. And suddenly they clutch their purses and I say, relax. But I will say there is great income inequality between the East River or the Harlem River, where we cross over a little bridge and all of a sudden we're in a very different world. But it's part of our responsibility to understand that it's beyond the stereotypes we think of it as. New York City has endured now 7 months of stereotypes about how chaotic it is. And part of our responsibility is to make sure that we're always being ambassadors for a holistic understanding that is accurate and supportive of our places. And that goes for everywhere we go. I mean, as a New Yorker, frankly, I would badmouth other cities sometimes. I'd be like, all right, hope you enjoyed New York because it's about to get boring. But I understand that while they know I'm joking, that persona is actually not respectful on a deeper level to the opportunities there. And sometimes it's just connecting to the local culture in a particular way. I've marched through the Halloween parade in Greenwich Village with a group before. I've done a pickup game of basketball with a group of adults and a group of students on a local basketball court. Just giving yourself permission to understand that in these little moments of free time, there might be a way to go outside of the normal routes we get ourselves into. And I'll say this, I would check out this book, and I'll send out links later. A Snowball Fight at Harvard, absolutely. Hit the under 2 points for every undergrad. The Impact Tourism Handbook is part of CREST, which is the Center for Responsible Travel. And what they've done is they collected use cases or stories across the entire world of tour operators and guides doing things to figure out partnerships with local economies to give back. And it might mean Pack for a Purpose, where they this operator in Raleigh, North Carolina says, bring me toilet paper and we're going to take you on a tour, but first give me some toilet paper and we're going to staff a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter before the tour begins. And while that might not be right for a group of Australians flying across country, it might be right if you're stopping at a supermarket to get provisions and you might say, oh, and by the way, we're going to Raleigh, North Carolina. There's a lot, there's a real fantastic organization there that is helping the homeless or the impoverished. And if you want to, buy an extra roll of toilet paper or toothpaste or whatever. And when we drive to the hotel, we're going to present Susan's going to be there, whatever her name is. Susan's going to be there with a giant bin, and we're gonna present her with our offerings. And that kind of connection that does help the local economy in a small way, that is also creating an emotional connection with the place in your guests. And I've done versions of that all the time, and in different guises. And so, using those test cases, think about ways in which we can draw out those opportunities to connect in a different way than just us giving information. Diversity has been something that's been on all of our minds for the last 7 months, and if not before. George Floyd's murder was, of course, a massive catalyst for discussions around diversity and equity and inclusion within the travel industry, within the world. It's been a reckoning with history. Look at what Monticello and other places have done to relook at how they're interacting with their history of the enslaved, or how cities are interacting with their historical monuments. Companies are looking at the way they're hiring, the way they're marketing. I talked with one tour operator and I said, listen, I understand that you're doing great things on with diversity and inclusion, but I don't know if anyone's looked at your website, but I couldn't find a single person of color on your website. And they were shocked. I was talking to the owner of this company and they were shocked to do that because they weren't looking. And so part of awareness is just simply suddenly paying attention to things you don't realize are blind spots that are sending messages out there. And then I click refresh like the next day, and suddenly it was the most diverse website I've ever seen in my life. But drawing awareness out around these things, I just hosted another kind of conference thing that had a bunch of people talking about diversity. And one of them was Mike Idris, who is in Philadelphia. He's a young guy who started a company called Katika Experiences, which is all about a Philadelphia history tour of Independence Mall, of the historic district, but on the margins, understanding that there's a different story when you look at it from a different angle, the same buildings, the same places. It's the way, you remember that book in the 90s or whatever, People's History of the United States, where suddenly we were looking at American history not through the lens of just the great men and women who founded things and represented things, but through the people themselves. He's doing that with Philadelphia, and he works at Christ Church now, where he's helping them reimagine the story that they tell in their church space. And I think that's phenomenal. The point really is that as an operator, you might be hiring a different kind of historical walking tour. You might hire Mike's company to deliver a different kind of 3-hour Philadelphia walking tour. And we as guides might be understanding our responsibility to share the story, not just of the making of the Declaration of Independence, but understanding that we do have a responsibility to be sharing the story of everyone. And I'll say this much: we have such a privileged position of being able to talk in story and not stereotypes and slogans. I understand there are 3-word phrases and 2-word phrases that would immediately divide everybody on this call, and the chat box would be filled with rage and pain and absolute statements. But we can make similar points through history and through story in a way that removes us from the way hot button topics and slogans of today shut down our brains into us and them. And that's an incredibly powerful way to build bridges. And so I'll say that we do have an opportunity right now to also think of how we can look at our use, our language use on tour, and say, are we actually talking in generalities and stereotypes? When we go down to Little Italy, are we just talking about the Italians as mafiosos and talking about everybody that was killed there? I looked at, my Chinatown tour and realized that there was an opportunity that I had to share the story not only of the Chinese coming to New York, but the larger story of being Asian American in America. And it's because I read a book called The Making of Asian America. And it really opened my eyes to so much. And it's this zooming out that we get to do right now that's opening up so many possibilities in my mind. And it really, for me, is ingrained in my brain to never talk about they. Don't talk about the Italians, don't talk about the Irish. You might say it generally, but as soon as possible, that's my alarm, meaning stop talking. The point is, when we dial into individuals, when we dial into people and their real story, it's irrefutable. Generalities are extremely refutable because you just need to find that specificity, but we can learn. Sometimes the deepest and most specific inside of us is actually the most general, and it awakens a sense of empathy inside of us in a very different way than if we just talk about Russian Jews coming over to the United States. That kind of dialing into the individual allows listening with a different part of our brain. Our brains literally hear individual stories with plots, very different than hearing general fact statements, general information, or generalities. I read this book. It is 983 pages long, but I soaked up every minute of it because Joe Lepore on every page basically said, what if we told a history of the United States and just made sure that at every moment we were talking about sometimes things that we don't talk about: women, racial minorities, Native Americans, woven into the fabric of our country, which of course we all are. And it is a we, the people. It's not a they. That's called othering, where I'm a gay man, but everybody else is a they. These are stories of Americans, and weave them in as American stories, and ask, what are the practices that we can do that can really instantiate that on our tours? I was really impressed. I saw a virtual tour of an Australian man leading a tour of Sydney, and he began with what the National Indigenous Australians Agency offers as a way to begin any public moment, an event, or a tour, which is the welcome to our country. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I was struck with that because it was a powerful acknowledgement that begins something that obviously isn't a solution, but it is the beginning of a dialogue. Just to finish up, COVID is opening up new technological possibilities for us. This is the time for you to be really thinking about understanding the power of your coach screens and get my little orange bag, learn AirDrop, learn photo sharing apps, learn Google Drive, learn how to share links and learn how to educate people. This is a time for a winter tech project. We're about to go into maybe a very difficult period again for a lot of people around the world. Europeans here, a lot of you are already on a lockdown. So the Danish have a word called hygge. Say it with me, hygge, which is basically coping through winter with craft projects and togetherness. Redo your video introduction, redo your notes, your research notes, your photography skills, read a book together, do things with each other, because our mental health is going to slide very quickly. If some of this stuff inspired you to look at your itineraries, call up 4 other friends that you know do the national parks with you, that same tour, and have a brainstorming session. Read a book together. We've been doing that at Trip School all year long. All right, I knew there'd be somebody who would yell at my pronunciation. All right, thanks, Marvin. These activities together really make me think of a book that I've read that blew my mind at the beginning of all of this, and I'll end with this one. I know I need to be done. Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing. It's paradoxically not a book you would think would be great about tour guiding, but she just talks about the way in which we've commodified our time so much, and nothing commodifies our time like an itinerary. So the whole book is about understanding the way in which we can have moments of stopping to listen. She calls it attention holding architecture and how to be respectful to that, whether it's mere woods or a cathedral, the way place transforms our mind, and the way there's a certain musicality and crescendos, but also quietness about space. And I do think coming out of COVID, we're going to need to understand those respectful, quiet spaces as places of real healing for each other in ways that they weren't before. It's easy right now to mock and judge people. I see it every day. By the way, we should basically all be deleting our Facebook if we could, because my Lord, it's just atrocious. Keep in mind that Facebook really likes when we get really angry and get divisive. They make money. All right, I'm done. And so all that to say, in the end, when we are entering into this winter, remember that we have a lot of work to do in terms of reflecting on our tours, but also reach out to each other, do something nice for a colleague, do a random act of kindness, do it right after this, somebody you don't know. Figure out a way that we can turn this time into a deeper, more fulfilling time ahead for us. And as we all, as a community, enter into this difficult time together. The end. Sorry, Mon. I hope I didn't.
It's all good, man. Hey, you got so much to give, man, and we appreciate you giving it. It's so much to unpack there, man, and we have to, we'll have to touch on it in some future talks, man. But I mean, I think some of the major things, just authenticity, diversity, responsibility, sustainability, inclusion. So much of that's important in tourism and on what we do as tours. I know for us as tour operators, especially, making sure that we have that available or give, our guides and our tour directors the freedom to do it. So that's really good stuff, man. Thank you so much, Mitch.